Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're describing one of the other WAN technologies in order to essentially connect your different sites together. So similar to the MPLS video, if we have two sites here, or let's say four sites, so we'll say site 3 and site 4. So before we talk about the DM portion of a VPN, what is just a virtual private network or a VPN? So most of the time, 99.999% of the time, you're going to have an internet service provider that provides you with internet services. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same provider throughout all of your different sites. It could be a different provider, but you're going to have internet. In addition to that internet, you are going to be given a public IP address. Now, that public IP address could be dynamic, meaning, every week or so or every couple days, that public IP address may change. Or it could be a static IP address, meaning that public IP address is going to be yours forever. It's never going to change. Sometimes if you host internet services like websites and things like that, you may have multiple public addresses. But let's just go, for example, let's just use the example of a static IP address now in order to describe a VPN. Let's just say that that IP address is never going to change. It's assigned to all four of your locations. Now, again, behind each router, behind each edge router, you're going to have a local area network. You're going to have different subnets within those networks. Now, when I say edge router, that edge device is going to be typically at the edge between your internal network and your public network given to you by your ISP. So that can be a firewall, it can be a router. Sometimes it's a switch, but usually not. Usually it's a router or a firewall. So what does a VPN do? Well, imagine that I have a public IP address here. Now, just for examples here, we'll say that that's .1, this is .2, .3, and .4. Let's just make it simple. I don't want to draw in a whole IP address. Let's just give it a single number here just so that we understand the concept. What I can do with a VPN is that I can tell this router, look, I want you to go all the way throughout the internet, and I want you to connect yourself to .3, and I want you to go all the way through the internet and connect yourself to .2, and I want you to connect yourself to .4. And in that way, site 1 is now connected to all three of these sites, and it allows essentially you back here, right? So here's you, allows you to connect into all the different resources in the other three sites. However, if site 2 wants to get to site 3 and 4 and go back and forth, you need to do the same thing at site 2. You need to go to site 2 and you need to say, okay, I want you to go through the internet and get to site 4 and go to site 3. And obviously you've created this site over here. And you can see that as I keep drawing lines, this becomes a little bit more complex. And I'm only drawing 4 sites, right? Because you have to do the same thing with site 4. You have to have a connection to site 3. And then you have to have a connection between site 3 and site 4. So you have to have these connections in both directions. You have to go and configure this on each and every single router. But the concept of a VPN is to essentially virtually connect these local area networks together through the internet, through an encrypted tunnel. A lot of times we're going to use a protocol called IPsec. We're probably not going to get into that in this particular video. I'm not sure if we'll get into this in this curriculum, but you'll usually use a protocol called IPsec that will encrypt the traffic going in between these different sites, and that way you can connect them. The problem with a regular VPN, with a legacy VPN, is that you can't run routing protocols through it. There's a couple of other limitations to it. Does it connect the sites together? Sure, but again, I wouldn't be able to use something like EIGRP or OSPF. I wouldn't be able to turn on a routing protocol between them. Again, a legacy VPN, I wouldn't be able to do that. And then again, the configuration gets a little bit complex to keep going through and adding these different VPNs every time I turn up a site. The dynamic multi-point VPN is a type of VPN that can dynamically turn up and turn off tunnels as they're needed. And so it removes the requirement to constantly have all these tunnels up and running all the time. It removes the overhead, and it establishes those tunnels when they're required. And it was created to be a hub and spoke. If you remember and you go back to our network topologies, it was created as a hub and spoke topology, meaning we would have a single site. Let's just call this HQ. So we'll say HQ here. We would go and we would say, okay, you are going to be our DMVPN hub, and all of these sites are going to go through the internet and connect to our hub site. And in that way, all of these sites can also connect to each other, because if site 2 needed to see site 3, it would send its traffic up through site 1 and then come back out and go to site 3. And so in that way, it's a hub and spoke topology, with the hub being in the middle and all of these guys being spokes. But a DMVPN allows us to do things like run a routing protocol through it. So if I have multiple different networks over here, if I have multiple different subnets over here, I can run EIGRP or a routing protocol through that DMVPN, so I don't constantly have to go and add routes manually and say, okay, well, this route, if you want to go to this network, you have to go that way. If you want to go to this network, you have to go that way. We'll get into static routes a little bit later, but the idea is that I can run an automated routing protocol in my dynamic multi-point VPN in order to make my life a lot easier. Now, I can also have this configured to be spoke to spoke, meaning my DMVPN can learn routes and where to go. So for example, again, if I have this is my hub, if I have site 1 as my hub, and I have these guys as my spokes, the DMVPN can learn how to go directly between the spokes. So the first piece of traffic that I send, let's say I'm trying to get to site 3, the first couple of packets that I send would go from site 2 to site 1, and then it would learn how to get to site 3. And the first couple of pieces of traffic would go this way. However, after that initial traffic, every other time that I need to go to site 3, my traffic would go directly there. In that way, I now have a point-to-point or a spoke-to-spoke topology. And so the DMVPN is ever learning. And once I tear down those tunnels, once I don't need them anymore, the DMVPN will take down the tunnels and it will not keep them continually running. Now, we're not going to get into the configuration of this in this video. I think I do have one on YouTube if you want to see how to do that. But this is essentially one of the two technologies that I would recommend that you use. Now, there's a lot more. There's Metro Ethernet. There's different kinds of technologies that you would use to connect these sites together. I just wanted to give you two of them so at least you have some kind of an idea. But I'll see you guys in the next video. I think we're going to go over small office and home office networks.